Hello, welcome to HOTPOT. I'm your host, Joni Poon, stirring the pot on Asian BIPOC mental health and wellness. Right. Welcome, everyone, and I have such a special guest. Today I have Ian, who's my sifu. I reached out to him a few years ago. Oh my gosh, time flies so fast. Yeah. And before I dive into that story of how we met, I just wanted to introduce, he's my sifu, so he does internal and external martial arts work. He's also an energy healer and a coach in guiding people through different things, whether it's internal or physical or emotional, energetic. Yeah. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. And so it's so crazy how we met. I was in a moment in my life where I was going through a different spiritual awakening. So meaning for a period of time I would wake up having these really vivid dreams that I couldn't make sense of, but felt really real, and it felt like I was reliving another life, or sometimes it was just like literally my body speaking to me, and I would wake up moving in those shapes, like martial arts shapes, yeah, and feeling energy, seeing energy, moving them, and it reminded me of like growing up watching martial art movies, like in the Chinese Hong Kong films, and I was like, what's going on? Because I've never experienced any of that, and I remember I was like, I had the innate feeling that my body needed support in how I can connect with it better and prepare it better for all this energy that I was really connecting with, yeah, and flowing through me, but I didn't know. I was like, I just knew that I needed to prepare my body to connect more with my energy and this new flow that I was dropping into, and feeling a lot of energy in my senses. And I was like, what to do? Because I've heard if you don't know how to practice this properly or take care of your body or to be able to prepare your body for channeling that amount of energy, it can be very harmful. And I was like, ooh, not good.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Right? And then so I emailed, like I actually did my research. I connected with a couple of different professions that I know, including people who work with energy work. And at that time I was also doing somatic experiencing just to heal my body in a different way. That was very lovely, and that's how I got your contact from the practitioner I was working with, and I read your profile, and I'm like, yeah, this feels right, I don't know why. And then I was so scared. I remember emailing you, I was like, this may sound really weird, but this is what's happening, and I don't know how to describe it. I feel like I need to come and work with you. And yeah, you were like so gracious. You're like, oh yeah, this all makes sense. And I'm like, okay, good. Because I sound weird to me. So yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that email.
I totally do. Yeah. And it's, to me, that is not strange at all.
I'm curious, like, yeah, why was that not strange for you?
Well, I kind of, I don't live like in a linear way. And I don't function, I don't know, the way most people do, I think. I tend to live in the moment as much as I can and trust my intuition, and am always, from my perspective, I'm always in the right place at the right time. I'm always being brought whoever I'm supposed to work with. I don't tend to advertise what I do. So let's see, for 20 plus years, I've not really done any advertising. I only created a website like 12 years ago. But people tend to find me when, like, whoever needs to work with me tends to find me. And so that's how I end up working with people. So because I don't do things in a structured kind of linear, I mean, I'm very strategic in the way that I work, but I'm also very intuitive. So I, as much as possible, balance the masculine and the feminine within myself, and so that's why it wasn't really that weird to me, because that's how I live my life. If I feel like I need to go do something, then I'll just contact whoever, and I'll go do it, and I'll follow the breadcrumbs, and if it happens smoothly, then that's the way it's supposed to go. And if I find that I'm having roadblocks or things are not happening in a smooth way, then to me that's a sign that I should go in a different way.
And then trusting that intuition, which
Absolutely.
I'd love to dive more into after.
Yeah, for sure.
But I remember the moment when we met after, and we were our first session together. You're like, oh yeah, you've been like putting it out into the universe. It's like, this is the student I feel like I'm wanting to call into my life to work with. So
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh, how synergistic. Because I remember as we started working together, I would almost have like flashback feelings that we've met before, that we've worked together. And I'm like, oh, some of these things you're teaching me that I've already known from another lifetime. Not that I'm really good at it this time around, but
Right.
it felt familiar, which
Yeah.
was really amazing. And it just came out
That's
naturally.
cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I started doing the Kung Fu, I also had that kind of, I had an experience very similarly where I didn't really, I wasn't good at it when I started, but it felt very familiar to me.
Yeah.
And it felt like that's what I should continue doing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how
Oh, amazing.
I kind of did
So I'm
it.
going to backtrack a little bit
For sure.
because I introduced you to everyone as my Sifu. You go by Ian.
I go by Ian.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Ean Kramer, right?
Ian Kramer, but that wasn't my birth name.
Oh.
If you're wanting to know
Okay,
names.
well, I would love to, if you're open, let's dive into
For sure.
your origins first. Like, if
Yeah,
you're open,
okay.
what's your name?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So my birth name is Ernesto Antonio Villegas Kramer IV.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so in that, I have my name, my father's name, and both of my grandfather's names.
Okay,
So
it shows the lineage.
yeah, so there's a good bit of lineage in there, and because I'm the fourth, like I don't go by Ernesto. My dad was he didn't go by Ernesto either, and my grandfather didn't either. My great grandfather was originally from Germany, and he was his name was Ernst Kramer, and then he like ended up moving to the Philippines, and I'm not sure if he met my great grandmother and then moved there, or went there and met her. I didn't get that story, but that I ended up getting my dad's name, his name, my great grandfather's, and my grandfather's, and then my mother's father's name also, who he was in politics in the Philippines, and so there's a lot of people remember from the Philippines. Apparently, I continue to run into people that knew who he was.
Oh, wow.
His name was Tony Villegas.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, that's my backstory on name. My heritage is Filipino, Spanish, German, and Chinese.
Wow, what a mix.
And yeah, it's very different. Like I grew up similarly to you, being like kind of an outsider at the schools that I went to.
Yeah.
Like I was born in California. I grew up in the United States and in the Philippines and in back and forth in different places. I moved around a lot growing up, and then ended up moving to Canada in 2007.
Okay.
After meeting my wife here.
Wow, I'm curious, like from your lineage of name, why the name change to Ian?
Oh, that's what they called me.
Oh.
Yeah, so Ian was the nickname that I was given when I was younger.
Okay.
Yeah, Ian, I spell it EAN, which is short for Ernesto Antonio.
Oh, so it's like an acronym.
Yeah.
An abbreviation.
An abbreviation.
Yeah,
of
abbreviation,
my full
acronym.
name. Yeah.
Abbreviation to your full name.
Right.
That's amazing. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're still honoring those pieces, your lineage.
Yeah.
It's really cool to hear history.
Yeah.
So is that the meaning behind? So I guess that's the meaning behind Ian. EAN.
Yeah.
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 Do you know why your parents decided to? Is it like a Spanish tradition or like a Filipino tradition to
have a nickname?
No, not only that. Like to have like your family name and then family name, the fourth, or to.
I think it is. I think
Okay.
in the Philippines they do that quite a bit.
Okay.
Obviously, since I'm the fourth, like I have a half brother and half sister, and my brother didn't get. He's not any of that.
Okay,
Like-
interesting. So why did they decide to do
I was
that?
the eldest.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it usually traditionally the eldest takes on?
I think so.
Okay, I don't know. That's
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah. I mean, my father was the eldest. Well, on my dad's side, my dad had two older half brothers, and then my grandmother's first husband passed away, and then so after she married her second husband, my father was the first male, and so he got the name of my grandfather, who was my grandmother's second husband.
Right. Okay, this is making sense. So then you're also the eldest because you're the firstborn.
I'm the eldest. I was the eldest grandchild on both sides too.
Oh wow. Okay, so I'm hearing you're the eldest. You have all this mixed ethnicity, so that means mixed cultural background. What was that? And then feeling othered as well growing up because
Yeah.
you were in the States, North
Yeah.
America. How did that all come play in, and yeah, what was that like?
Yeah, so growing up, I was really, because I moved so much, I was really shy and afraid, and so didn't really make lots of friends. And every year I was in a different school. So
Oh, that's hard.
yeah, so that was quite different. And when I was a kid, like I had in California, there were black kids and Asian kids, but the Asian kids were Chinese. There was like I had like one or two Chinese friends, maybe like one Korean friend, and then everybody else was white or Mexican. Or, so I didn't have any Filipino friends growing up. Only my relatives.
Right.
So I would connect with my relatives, and then when I was at school, it was just everybody's either like white or Mexican or black.
What was that like?
I never felt connected to anybody. So luckily it gave me the ability to be independent and to not have to have everything be the same, and like I didn't need as much security, I think, as a result of that.
Okay.
So, but I did have to overcome that fear of being alone. So it was a huge fear of mine when I was young, and then I just stayed by myself in order to overcome it.
So did you find that fear withdrew you away from connecting with others when you were growing up or when you were younger?
Yeah, well,
or the fear of being vulnerable and connecting with others because it's like, well, I'm gonna move.
Yeah, well, because I had the fear. I was always afraid of connecting with other people. Like I remember being too afraid to like ask people where the washroom was when I would go to when I was at the mall with my parents.
Right.
Like I gotta go, and they're like, just ask the woman over there. No,
it's really
couldn't do it. Yeah.
And what allowed you to really overcome that then?
Yeah, so because I moved around a lot, and I was very afraid. I was also extremely overweight, and so I was self-conscious and couldn't really. Basically, what I internalized was that it wasn't okay for me to speak to other people, kind of, because that was growing up in my culture. As a child, you're supposed to be seen and kind of not heard, and you don't talk back to your elders, and there's a whole way that you have to behave with people.
Is that from the Filipino Chinese side?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that, like not being heard but just seen, and then adding those elements of feeling othered when you're in not your homeland, right?
Yeah. So, well, it made me not really put myself out there with anybody. I just kind of withdrew and either read comic books or played with toys or played video games or played with the one or two friends that I had here or there. But I was definitely not going out and doing things other than like riding my skateboard, but I wasn't I didn't have tons and tons of friends, and I wasn't very confident about exploring or doing anything physical until I became a teenager.
Okay, so there's something shifted. You sat with that feeling or that fear. Did you sit with it or did it?
Well, actually what happened was I was forced kind of to move to the Philippines when I was a teenager.
Okay.
And me being forced to move there put me out of my comfort zone. And I had a completely different lifestyle and different experience. I didn't live with my parents anymore. I moved there. I was living with an aunt and uncle and my cousins, and I was in a completely different environment, and I changed kind of consciously how I was using my body. So I started actually doing physical things with my cousins and like playing basketball and badminton and things like that, and I stopped eating like junk food all the time, because growing up in California, that was kind of, it was Taco Bell, McDonald's, pizza, that kind of thing. And so like, I remember with my parents split up when I was 7, and they both remarried the following year. And my mother's second husband my stepfather would like have contests with me to see who would eat the most when we go to Taco Bell and things like that. So it was very unhealthy, and eat like lots of ice cream. And
so it sounded like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded like eating was a way of connecting. It allowed you to connect.
Yeah.
Like with your stepfather, that's a thing of bonding. So instead of talking and expressing through words and feelings, let's eat.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, I definitely, well, actually, the whole Philippine side of the family also, my stepfather was Caucasian, by the way.
Okay.
The whole Philippine side of the family, everybody connects through food. It's super, everybody, like I was recently there and everybody just wants to get together and eat. Yeah.
And what's that like? Because I know you realized something, well, you connected with something that shifted. It sounded like a change in environment and a change in a lot of like disrupt in your comfort and familiarity really brought you to like, okay, maybe I can connect with others in a different way through movement. What led to that?
Yeah, the movement thing didn't actually happen until I was in my 20s.
Okay, so then where that shift happened, or what was that even like, moving to the Philippines as a teenager?
Yeah.
And then being really submersed with your culture because you haven't been.
Right. Yeah, so when I went to the Philippines, I was 14 years old. I was 189 pounds, and I was about 5'6" or 7" at the time.
Okay.
And I was extremely overweight at the time, and over the course of after the first 3 months I was there, I think over the next 6 months I had ended up losing 50 pounds and growing. And so I had a radical change in my body in a very short period of time. And I was put into school with my cousin, who was extremely social, and he just submerged me into a social situation all the time. So that kind of forced me to be social.
Brought you out of your shell.
Yeah. And I was the new kid from a different country, so I was kind of forced into the spotlight there. Right. And I created a certain personality as a result of doing that.
Did looking different also contribute to that?
I think so, yeah.
And then what was that process like, just looking different, and yet you're also Filipino and Chinese, but you're not all Filipino.
Yeah.
And then being in a culture of like, with your family that's all Filipino, like.
Yeah, when I go, like, there, I don't look Filipino. When I go to the Philippines.
Right, yeah.
Right, so it doesn't matter where I go, I don't look like I'm from there, usually.
Yeah, so what was that experience like? Because, I mean, for me, as I'm hearing this story, it's almost like a sense of otherness as well, too. Because in North America, you don't look white.
Right.
Right? And then a lot of the minorities, there weren't a lot, because you said there's only one Mexican or a few Mexicans.
Oh, a lot of Mexicans in California, just not a lot of Filipinos. Right. Well, actually, there are a lot now.
Okay, so when you were growing up earlier,
when I was
there
growing
wasn't many Filipinos, some Chinese, but mostly white.
Yeah.
And then now, and when you're 14, you move to Philippines, and then again, you look different. You're not all pure Filipino. If
oh yeah, and I totally don't sound Filipino.
Right, exactly. So what was that experience like? Again, so you're like, yeah, I'm gonna move back to be with family, or you weren't given a choice?
I wasn't given a choice.
So actually, let's backtrack a little bit. What led to that move?
Well, what led to the move was, it was interesting. I had mentioned that I moved every year. Yes. Basically, I went to a preschool, I went to a different kindergarten, I went to a different grade 1, different grade 2, different grade 3, 4, 5, and a different grade 6, and I stayed in the same school from 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then grade 9, I went to one high school for 3 months, and then I moved to the Philippines and went there I did 2 years of school, 2 years and 1/4 of school in the Philippines, and then I ed to Atlanta for my senior year of high school.
Wow, that's a lot of moving.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. So the reason that I continued to move was because I lived with one parent 1 year, and then I moved with the other parent the following year, and then I moved back with the other parent the next year, but in a different place, in a different school, and then moved with the other parent the following year, and then I didn't really want to keep moving. I just wanted to live with my mom, and so finally they acquiesced, and I lived with my mom 6th, 7th, 8th, and beginning of 9th grade. And then my mother and her husband were getting a divorce, and they couldn't have me around. So my father was moving to the Philippines. He had since remarried and had 2 kids, my brother and sister. And so their plan was to move to the Philippines, and they thought, well, this is what Ian should do.
Oh, shit.
So initially I was given a choice of, you can move to the Philippines, or you can move to Nevada and live with your grandmother there. And then my stepfather, he was the person that I was the closest with of my parents.
Oh, interesting.
So both my parents and my stepmother and stepfather. My stepfather was the one that was closest with me. He spent a lot of time with me. He taught me quite a lot of things. And so originally, actually, I was going to, he talked to me about the potential about getting a lawyer and having me divorce my parents and have him adopt me. And so I'd looked into doing that, and I was going to do that.
Oh, you were that close.
Yeah, we went to see a lawyer, and that's what we were going to do. And so my father had planned on flying to the Philippines. It was like the U.S. Thanksgiving in 1987. And he said, okay, well, we're going to, 3 weeks before that, he said, okay, well, why don't we get your stuff and we'll take you to San Francisco. At the time I was living in San Jose, California. He said, we'll take you to San Francisco, you can just stay there and then we'll all go. And then my stepfather said, well, why don't you just let him stay here, and then he can see his friends and spend time with his friends until he has to leave. Because it was the first time I'd lived in one place for more than a year and had the same friends for a few years. So, and I was going into high school. It seemed like a pretty important time. And then, so the night before, so I was going to, we told my dad that I was going to meet him at the airport. And the night before, my stepfather took me to this children's shelter where these homeless kids lived. And I spent this Thanksgiving weekend there so that my parents wouldn't be able to find me. And then, so I didn't show up to the airport. My father's pretty devastated. My mother finds out where I am by the Sunday and picks me up. So I get dropped off on the Wednesday night. Sunday, she comes, she picks me up, she finds out where I am, she puts a restraining order on my stepfather, takes me to San Francisco to my great-grandmother's house, and then not very long after, my father calls me and says, okay, well, you're going to move here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that sounds hard. That was quite...
Yeah.
Yeah, how did that even impacted you, like, as you're just even retelling that story?
Oh, yeah, I'm okay telling the story.
Yeah, but, like, thinking back into that moment as you were growing up in that kind of environment, like, you didn't have, like, a home base, right?
No. So, I mean, I grew up not having that, so it wasn't like it was any unusual thing for me.
Did it feel like you weren't, like, did it feel like you didn't belong at home as well?
Oh, well, I didn't feel like I had home.
Oh. And how did that impact you, like, growing up and as an adult? Like, because there's all these layers I'm hearing.
Yeah, there are quite a lot of layers.
Yeah.
Actually, so it's all been perfect. I mean, it impacted me in ways that I was able to gain insights regarding growth that I needed to have, like things that I needed to heal, and obviously everything that I've worked on within myself has been helpful for the people that I work with.
Amazing. Because you said it's perfect now. Has it always been that thought? Like,
no, I didn't always feel like it was perfect now.
So what did... Thanks for being honest. So what did it feel like in that moment? And what did that feel like in that moment before it was like, oh yeah, it's all meant to be?
Like, which particular moment are you talking about?
Well, which really stood out for you? Like, was it like your childhood being bounced back between, or not having like even a home, or bounced back between your family, or being even closer to your stepdad than your actual biological parents?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's all I knew. So there wasn't any ideas. Well, actually, at the time, I had ideas about, I wished my parents were, like, I had a different relationship with my parents. You know, I wished I was closer to them. Like, my mother used to, as a child, my mother used to threaten me with my father.
Oh.
So my father wasn't abusive, but he was very strict. And so, like, if you misbehaved, then he would talk to me about, okay, well, how many times do you think you need to be spanked? Whatever I tell him, then that's what he'd do. So it was an interesting thing, though, because I was extremely sensitive to emotions and energy, and so if my father changed the tone of his voice, I would start crying as a kid because it was extremely overwhelming to me.
So, yeah, being sensitive and having no home base, or because for me, I equate having home or consistency as a form of safety, right? So, and then if you're a sensitive child, and I'm quite sensitive, and when you're not sure of your environment, because I've grown up where, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure what it's going to be like, I know my parents love me, and I know my mom's great, but she can also suddenly, like, for no reason, burst out, and I was like walking on eggshells, and then so I find that I struggled with the safety piece, like knowing what that's like in my own body, and then of course that ties into like my own self-worthiness, and how did that really impact you? Because you said, oh yeah, it's perfect now, but before in that moment, what did it feel like for you?
Yeah, I had huge unworthiness issues and abandonment issues. So because my mom left when I was 7, I felt like there was no conversation about it. So like, oh, your mom's moving out. Okay, and when I get to see her again, you get to see her like twice a month. It's like on the weekend, two weekends a month you can see her. I was like, oh, okay.
So I'm hearing powerlessness too.
Absolutely.
Because it's like you're like even you moving to the Philippines, like there were things you wanted to do, like you wanted to be with your stepdad because you felt a closeness and connection, and you weren't given that choice either. You weren't. So it's all piecing together. It's like, yeah, you are seen, but you're not heard.
Yeah. Your
value, like your opinions weren't even considered or factored in.
That's right.
Yeah. And how did the piece of self-abandonment, or not self, like being abandoned, and then that piece of like not having self-worth, how did that really impact you as you grew into your adulthood?
Yeah, well, so let's see, that's a very good question. Well, it's always been important for me to be helpful to people, and also I have in the past been somewhat of an extremist in the things that I do. Like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it to the maximum that I can do it for as long as I can do it until I embody it, and then I'll move on to something else. So maybe the unworthiness had drove me to be better at things.
Drive you to do the maximum
you
can do.
Yeah.
And that piece that you mentioned about, you said something before the maximum, like being the best. You also mentioned, lost my train of thought for a second here. You said something else, but I can't quite remember it. I don't remember if you said something just prior to that.
Let's see. Oh, let's see. I was talking about unworthiness issues and being an extremist, doing things. I had my motto used to be everything in moderation, including moderation.
Okay, here's the thing. Now I remember. You also mentioned that you had a drive to wanting to help people.
Oh yeah.
Where did that come from?
I think it comes from. Well, I kind of feel like my life path is to serve, so I think that's where it comes from. Like it's just an innate kind of thing.
I'm curious if I can understand that innate aspect, which is very lovely. I wonder if part of that innate aspect was also shaped by your upbringing, the fact that you were, like, your mom left you, and then you were abandoned, and then even then your dad's left, like, you had to go between, like, 1 year with your mom, 1 year with dad, so then there's, like, a figure that's leaving you in that sense, or you're not given a choice. And I wonder if there's that element of yourself where you were brought up as like, okay, I need to conform, I need to go with the flow so that I have at least a shelter to live, and a place to live, somewhere at home, and then feeling like I need to please people, so I want to serve in however modality ways I can.
Right.
I wonder, right? Because
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know. Growing up, the information that I got from my mother growing up was that however I looked wasn't correct.
Oh.
So like I couldn't have. It was like I remember being a senior in high school and then like letting my hair get long, and she was like, you need to cut your hair because you won't get a job. And then I had pierced my ear when I was 18. She's like, you can't have an earring, So she was very concerned with looks. So she was always saying that I had to look a certain way, and it was really something that I kind of went against. I was like, well, I'm going to look however I want to look because it's nobody's business but mine. And I never had any issues working. So like, I moved out when I was 18 because my mother had grounded me, and for spending money that was mine. And then she said, at one point in time, she said, well, if you walk out that, I was 18 years old. It was a sunny day. It was about 5:30 in the evening. I lived in a wealthy part of Atlanta, and I was very frustrated, and I said, I need to go for a walk. And she said, if you walk out that door, don't come back.
Oh, wow.
I said, all right. Okay. So I grabbed my bag, walked out the door, and walked up to the mall where my girlfriend was working at the time, told her what happened. She called her mom. She was like, you're going to come home with us. I went with them, and by the Sunday my mother found out where I was. She called me up screaming at me. She's like, you need to get your ass home right now. I'm like, why, so you can scream at me in person?
Right.
It's like, not going to happen.
Right.
And her husband got on the phone. This is her third husband now. And he's yelling at me, and I'm crying, and the way that the conversation ended was like, it's not going to happen. So her parents my girlfriend's parents at the time were super cool. They're like, you can stay here as long as you want. And I went to school with them. I lived there, and then I ended up getting a job 2 weeks later, so that I wasn't just completely living off of them, and I've never had an issue supporting myself since then.
That must be hard growing up in an environment like your mom telling you what you can and cannot do, and you have to conform.
Yeah.
And then the inconsistency again, it's like I'm hearing her wounds showing up. It's like, you don't make me feel good, and I feel like my authority and my sense of self-worth and is being questioned in power, and so therefore now don't come home, right? And then like, of course she really doesn't want that. She also doesn't want to feel abandoned, but it seems like there's a lot of like these family patterns happening that you grew up with as well. Yeah, yeah. And did you notice those patternings showing up in your relationships as you went through your adult life?
Not in, well, what I noticed at one point in time, I noticed that I used to end relationships so that I wouldn't get left. At one point in time.
Okay. So it's like, let me pull the trigger before you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like constantly. It's like that fear. So you're protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And I think this leads into, you were earlier sharing, it's like you had a hard time expressing your emotions.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Tell me more. Like, tell us, like, because I feel like that fits all together. Like, you're like, I'm gonna leave so that I don't get hurt first, right?
Yeah. So it's funny because I talked to you about, I moved in with my girlfriend and her family, and we were in high school until June. So this was in January. So it's about 6 months. I lived there. We graduated from high school. We went off to. We ended up going to France for a month that summer, and then at the end of the summer, my girlfriend moved to Boston to go to university, and I didn't have any plans of going anywhere. I was just working at the time, and then when she moved to Boston, it brought up the abandonment issues like really really powerfully within me, and I was devastated. And I, over the course of like the next year, I ended up shutting my emotions down, like completely, to where I couldn't feel anything. And it was I was like that for like 3 years.
What would that, okay, so can you give us an imagery of what that would look like, a shutdown Ian?
Yeah, what that would look like is I wasn't happy all the time. I just basically everything, like I just existed in my mind all the time. Everything was like, what's the most logical thing to do? And at the time, I think the way that I connected with friends was alcohol and drugs. Yeah.
Was it to allow yourself to loosen up, or did the alcohol and drugs just help numb the pain because it was just too much and that's why you shut down?
Well, I was shut down so I couldn't feel the pain.
Yeah.
So the alcohol and drugs, actually, so when I moved to the Philippines, there's no drinking age there. So my cousins would take me out, and we would go drink and have fun. We'd go to clubs, and as long as you could pay, they let you in. And we would go to these clubs, and we would be brought in, and they would make a table for us, and it was like we were like with the mafia or something. It was a weird thing. When I was like 15 years old, to be going out, and I would go out and get like a bottle of vodka, and I would drink until I blacked out.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I had a lot. I used to get blackout drunk quite a lot when I was a teenager.
And is it to help you?
Yeah, to numb.
To numb,
Yeah.
not feel, to forget.
Yeah.
And then it was also socially accepted because at that young age, like you said, there's no drinking age limit.
Yeah.
And then to feel so special, it's like, oh, we're special people to get a whole table and served, and I'm sure people are friendly and you're having a good time. So then it's almost like a form of connection that you were missing, right?
Yeah.
And then it win-win, because then you don't have to feel, but then you get to feel special and not alone and accepted because it's a social thing that people were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you did that for 3 years.
Yeah, and then when I moved to Atlanta and had different friends there, and then I ended up the first job I ended up getting was selling newspaper subscriptions door to door.
Okay.
So, which is another thing that sort of got me out of any. If I had any shyness, I had to not have any shyness in order to knock on a stranger's door and ask them to buy something.
Right.
So I did that, and then I got into the restaurant business. I was waiting tables first, and then I got into cooking and was cooking for a living.
Okay.
And bartending.
Bartend. Okay, and that's so different from what I know you and the work you did. So how did that lead you into martial arts and?
Yeah. So that is a very good question. So this is a very long story. So I was cooking for a living, and I was the only thing the thing that I got the most out of university was I was a radio DJ.
Okay.
So the university had a radio station that was one of the top radio stations in the country. I was a radio DJ there, and then I sold newspaper subscriptions door to door, and then I was also cooking. So I was doing 3 things at one time. I did.
Hard.
Yeah, I think I had like 1 day off a week.
Oh wow. Okay.
And 2 of the days I would work from like 4 in the afternoon until about 4 or 5 in the morning.
Wow.
And I didn't have any problem doing it. I was young, and I was happy to work. And because I was in the restaurant business, all of my friends were also in the restaurant business, so like we would go out and party afterwards, and
And then it's almost like family then. You don't have to be alone.
Yeah.
So it sounded like you were also keeping yourself very busy again to not have to feel be alone.
Well, it was really important for me to have connections with groups of people, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to be connected to some cool core groups of people, one in the Philippines and then also in Atlanta when I lived there. And so that I was cooking for a living, and how I got into how things changed was that I had been studying energy healing, and I had.
Oh, so you already started studying energy.
I'd already started.
Okay,
Yeah.
what led into that then? Because
yeah. So it was with my friends. We take acid. We go to concerts.
Okay.
And then one day, one of my friends gave me the Celestine Prophecy. I read it, and everything that I'd been feeling in my body when I'd been taking LSD or mushrooms or something was, I got confirmation about it in the book. And then that's what got me to start going out and doing workshops and getting my Reiki certification, and then started studying pranic healing and anything that looked related to that, I was into knowing about.
So psychedelics was like a gateway for you to really be more in touch and tuned with yourself,
yes.
your energy.
Yes.
And then through that process, did it bring up the awareness? It's like, oh, I'm quite disconnected with my emotions. Did it bring up?
No, what brought that up was my teacher telling me that I was disconnected from it.
Oh, you were that disconnected that you didn't even the drugs didn't. Because I know with psychedelics, they call them empathogens because it allows you to feel more.
Right.
Right? And what you felt more was more your energy, your body, which is really interesting because that's what you naturally gravitated towards later on in your tween and teen years, right? Because of the movement and physical activity in body. And then so you didn't even realize you were still disconnected with your feelings until your teacher told you that.
Yeah.
What did he say? Or like, how did that come about?
So well, it came about when I said I would like to. This is I did this energy healing workshop with him, and I said this is what I want to do. I was taught a method of diagnosing people's energy and tuning into it and being able to have an awareness of it and have a sense of what to do and how to one, alleviate blockages and help like do different things with people's energy so that it can come back into balance and in harmony with itself. So after I did that workshop, I said, this is what I want to do. And he said, well, if you want to do it, you need to see a therapist because you can't feel. And that's when I said, well, will you do that for me? And then he agreed to doing that. And then he started working with me. And initially when he would say, okay, well, what are you feeling right now? He goes, go to that. And every time he would ask me what I would start to feel, I would go into my head. I would start thinking, and he'd be like, no, go back into your body, feel in your body. So it was a challenging thing for me because initially I couldn't think and feel at the same time. So I was either in my head or I was in my body, and because I'd practiced being in my head so much,
naturally defaulted to that.
Yeah, all the time.
And then he encouraged you to drop down into your body.
Yeah, he taught me how to stay with what I was feeling, and initially it was the way that I described it was like it would be like floating in the middle of the ocean and having these giant waves crash over your head with no boat or anything.
Scary, yeah.
And so it was really scary. That's exactly how it felt to me. It felt like I was in the water, and it makes sense because water is a symbol for emotions, right? So after doing that, I gained the ability to feel safe enough to feel again.
So you naturally automatically go into your head. What does that look like? If like people were to listen to you share about this, because I'm sure others have felt like, I feel really disconnected, but I don't even know what this body feeling is like. And I like that water analogy. So for you to go naturally into your head, what's that like? Do you start talking to yourself or overanalyze, overthink?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
To the point where you're just trying to create a reasoning behind your emotions where you're not really feeling it, you're just dancing around.
Well, it's interesting because if you are disconnected from your emotions, you can learn to justify anything, which is not the healthiest position to be in. There's not a lot of compassion for other people when you can't feel.
So I'm hearing a lot of judgment and self-criticism.
Oh yeah.
So judgment outwards and internalized as well. And then your teacher and the therapist you worked with also taught you how to be more in your body. So what allowed you to start building that safety instead of feeling like I'm in the middle of an ocean with waves crashing? I mean, there's no lifeboat. Yeah,
well, it was being in the same place with him and realizing that it's okay. And initially, he'd ask me these questions when I'm sitting there, and I realized like later on that I had internalized that if somebody was asking me questions, I used to get very afraid when they would ask me questions because I would think that I was in trouble. Mm-hmm. Because when I was a kid, that was the only time they talked to me. Was when I was in trouble, usually. There wasn't a lot of, other than, what do you want to eat or
so you learn again that to express yourself, and if they wanted to connect with you to talk, it means you were in trouble. So really, you're not allowed to talk again. It's just
it didn't feel comfortable talking.
Yeah. Well, it didn't feel comfortable, and it meant that you were in trouble. So the more talking you did, then it means more unsafety.
Yeah. So it's one of the key points that I'd love for your listeners to hear is that from this is that we create the meanings that we experience in our lives, and something that I've learned as a result of doing a lot of the internal work on myself is that a lot of times the meanings that we create don't have to be those meanings.
You can reshape them.
Yeah.
You can reframe them.
Yeah.
I mean, oftentimes people like talk about the other end is like, oh yeah, it's perfect, it's all meant to be, and then people don't talk about the journey as much. The journey in itself, like you've shared that you've done a lot of work. Can you share a little bit more what that process is like? The difficulties, because I remember when, I'm still in it.
Yeah.
And I think it's an endless journey, and in some ways for people who are just beginning sounds daunting, right? It's like, oh, and then if I were to compare myself to like a few years ago, I wouldn't want to go back.
Right.
I feel like I'm more of who I am. I feel brighter. I feel like I'm spending more time in pockets of joy that feels really authentic and just pleasant to be in.
Awesome.
And I'm loving who I am, right? Which is beautiful.
That's great.
And I struggled with that, but then doing that work, and there are still moments now that I was just like, this is really hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really hard. It's like, there's moments where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? It's just like feeling, because when you start really connecting with your feelings more and emotions, and then even the pieces that are scary, it can be very uncomfortable.
It can be.
And even when you do work on it and you're like, oh, I thought I did work on this, why is it still coming up?
Right. Yeah. Yes, it's a great insight to have, and that's exactly actually how it works is, or from my perspective, my understanding is that we go through a process where we have something that triggers us. We have to work through whatever the thing is that has been brought up. If we can give ourselves the opportunity to feel that thing and to gain clarity about it, then it integrates in a way that it doesn't feel as acute in one place energetically within the body. So it disperses, it's integrated, and then we go on with our lives, and then we have another situation that looks maybe completely different, but it brings up a very similar thing, and we're like, why is this happening again? Well, it's not the same thing. It's like working or moving around a spiral staircase. So we're in the same place where we're looking at it from the same angle, but we're one level up from where we were before, so it's not exactly the same. So there might be a different insight about this one.
Yeah, I oftentimes, when I work with clients, I tell them it's like a fog. They're like, fog? It's like, oh, pardon my French here, it's like another fucking opportunity of growth. Fog.
I like
That's
that.
why you're in the fog right now.
I like
because
that.
It's another growth moment for you. And once you come out at the other end, there's where clarity is and the fog goes away.
Oh, that's great.
Right? And can you tell me more about, like, if you're willing, share about some of your fog moments and what really helped you through those difficulties, or what did those difficulties even feel like, right?
Let me see. That's a really good question.
And sometimes I think it's like people we're really close with that triggers those learning moments.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
The one you first mentioned is like when your girlfriend that you had a really good relationship and her family was really open, and then she left for Boston. You're like, oh, right. That's like your piece of like, you need to work on this abandonment thing.
Yeah, well, I didn't know it. So at the time, that was when I shut down and I didn't work on anything for a while.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Let me think about this. There have been many. Okay. I'm going to jump around for a second. And this is, I don't know if this is a fog moment, but this is the moment that was really strange, and this story's coming up, and so I'm going to tell it. So, all right, so it told you that I moved from Atlanta from the Philippines to Atlanta. And I lived in Atlanta for 16 years. And Atlanta was the place where I went through a lot of growth. I was there from when I was 17 until I was 33. And it was great. I mean, I loved it there. I would never live there again, I don't think. But I had great friends, and that's where I got into martial arts. That's where I started studying energy healing. That's where I got into rock climbing. That's where I had a lot of relationships and learned a lot about myself and went through a tremendous amount of growth. Anyway, I had been getting the message that I needed to move back to California. I would go to California every year or every other year, and every time I would go back to San Francisco, I felt like, this is home. This is where I need to be. And I would go back to Atlanta, and a year or two would go by, and I would go back to California and be like, oh, I need to move out here. Then I'd go back to Atlanta, and it would happen over and over again. Finally, 2005, I'm back in San Francisco, and I'm thinking, I need to move back here. And then it occurred to me, well, if I don't decide on a particular date, I will never leave Atlanta. So I said, okay, next year, this date, I need to have this amount of money. If I have this amount of money, I will leave. I'll close my business. I had my own business. I was teaching Pilates, doing personal training, teaching Kung Fu, doing energy healing. That was what I did. And it was great. I had a pretty successful business in Atlanta, great clients. And the following year, at the time, I had the amount of money that I decided on, so I shut my business down when it was at its kind of height there. And friends of mine said, well, what are you going to do in San Francisco? And I said, well, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to teach Kung Fu, do personal training, do energy healing, and maybe I'm going to see if I can get into movies doing Kung Fu. And they said, well, why don't you move to LA instead of San Francisco? And I said, well, I don't really like LA. I like, from Northern California, and it's a different vibe, and I prefer that. So at some point in time, somebody said, well, why don't you go to Vancouver? They make a lot of movies there. Okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So because I didn't have a business that I was going to start or a job to immediately go to, I decided, well, I'm going to visit people in different places on my way to California. I'll drive, and I ended up taking a year and driving down to the Florida Keys and hang out with my friend that's a scuba diver there, and going diving, and went and taught at my Grandmaster School in Texas, and went and visited people in Kentucky and Colorado and Michigan, and I went to Toronto and drove all over. And I ended up actually there's two parts of the story. So at one point in time, the year's almost up. I'm in Colorado at my father's house. Money that I'd saved in order to get me to where I was going is almost gone. I am starting to feel depressed. I'm at my dad's house, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I don't have my own business here. I need to make a bunch of money in order to be able to get to Vancouver again. And so I was feeling very down, and a friend of mine sent me a DVD. I have a friend that's a comic book artist, and he had a DVD made of an interview that was done at his house. These people interviewed him, and then he sent me the DVD, and I watched the DVD. And in the DVD, he tells me the story that I had told him years before. He tells the story of sometimes you don't have to know all of the steps in order to get to where you're going. So like if you're a kid and you are playing, by like a lake or some kind of water thing, and you jump to a rock. When you jump to that rock, sometimes you might be able to see another rock that you can jump to, and then you jump to that rock, and from that rock you might be able to see another rock that you can jump to, and you jump to that rock. And you see that you can get further than you did from where you could see initially. So when he told me this story, I was like, I don't need to make as much money as I had in order to get me covered for an entire year. I just need to get there. And when I get there, I can generate more. So I said, okay, I need, I came up with a number in my mind of, this is the amount of money I need. Okay, I'm going to figure out how to generate this. So I'm in Colorado. I make a friend. I make a few different friends there, and one of them I tell them the situation. I'm like, okay, I'm looking to make some money. She ends up introducing me to this person who grows marijuana, and this was before it was legal. So he had it. He had it set up to where it was all like in this hidden aspect of a barn where you couldn't even see it if you had like heat sensors from the sky.
Wow.
So he had it really
locked.
Yeah, he had a great setup.
Right.
And so initially I was introduced to him, and it was asked if I could do some energy work with him, and he really resonated with the work that I did with him. And then he asked me if I wanted to do some trimming for him, so I started to make some money doing that, which was great. Meanwhile, I had picked a date when I was supposed to leave. I didn't have anywhere near the amount of money that I was projecting that I wanted in order to leave. But the day is coming, and I'm like, I'm leaving on this date, and I'm going to have the money, and I don't know how. The day before I leave, he says, come have breakfast with me. So we go and have breakfast. And he says, he goes, I was told to do this. He goes, I'm gonna give you something. He goes, I don't want you to give it back to me. He said, but I was told that I need to give you this. And so he slides me an envelope, and in the envelope is the balance of the amount that I wanted to have.
But you didn't tell him.
I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody the amount that I wanted, but this was exactly what I needed in order to get me to Vancouver. So I ended up coming to Vancouver. During the time I was here, I manifested places to stay. I met people. I made friends. I ended up meeting the person that's now my wife. And when we developed a friendship over the time, and then we ended up hooking up like right before I left. And I'd been a year traveling and being in different places and connecting with different people here and there, and I had no issues leaving and saying, I'm going to San Francisco. There's not going to be me hanging out and being here for a long period of time. You used to that growing
up too. You're just like, okay, pick up, go, bye.
Exactly. It was exactly the same thing. So I said, okay, well, this is my plan. If you want to hang out while I'm in town, I'm happy to, but I'm not going to move here, and I'm not going to create a long-term relationship with anybody. So just so you know. So I create this friendship with this woman, and then we end up connecting right before I left, and for maybe like 10 days. And that 10 days felt like it was like 3 months. And then I leave, and my plan was to drive to Colorado, meet up with my friends, go to Burning Man, and then move to San Francisco. So I left, and when I got to the border, I was sobbing. I was devastated, and I couldn't explain why. This was a weird thing. And then I ended up going to Burning Man, connecting, and then afterwards I called up Shauna, who's my wife now, and said, I'm going to San Francisco, do you want to meet me there? She ends up meeting me there. We end up having like a we continued dating to where we're like, well, should we meet here? So we met in different places, and then finally I decided to move to Vancouver, and that's how I ended up moving here. But the 2 points were about the manifestation of the money when I was needing and depressed.
You were like depressed.
Yeah.
And then you were meeting different people, so I heard that resilience of like, okay, let's connect, let's honor what's coming up for me, because I know that surrendering the fact that you didn't know everything, and you didn't have every step planned. Yeah. But they're like, what will be helpful is just being present and planning what I need to do next, and honoring what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
And what allowed you to really build that trust and going with that flow?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The thing that allowed me to do it the most was when I was in my early 20s and I was studying a variety of these different spiritual modalities. One of them was figuring out how to listen to myself on the inside and recognize when some information is being communicated to me in an authentic way. So I asked myself I asked myself for a sensation that would tell me when I'm hearing the truth. So I could, anytime I hear something that I know is true, I get a wave of energy move through my body in a certain way. So
it's
it's
a physical sensation.
Yeah, it's like, you know, when you get chills when you hear a ghost story or something like that, right? All the hair stands up on the arms. And so I was able to, in hearing the truth, then I was able to ask it questions, and if the answer is yes, then I get the same feeling run through me. So I started working with that. I'd also been listening to Esther Hicks' channel Abraham for since the mid-90s. So I did like the law of attraction stuff and was working with that. Actually on my way from Colorado to Portland on the drive to Vancouver, there was a time when I was driving and I was going through Utah and I had like a half a tank of gas, and I saw like a sign saying, okay, well, the next gas is like 40 miles. And I'm like, okay, well, I got plenty of gas for that. And I was taking, this is before iPhones and this is before GPS and stuff. So I was using a map book, and I took this one small freeway, and I'm on my way to Salt Lake City, and I'm looking at my gas gauge go down, and I'm looking at the signs saying, oh, well, the gas station's coming closer and closer. I'm like, great, okay, this is perfect timing. So finally I get to the gas station. Gas station has a fence around it.
Oh,
and
no.
I've been,
not what you want to see.
Not what I want to see. And my tank is almost empty.
Oh no.
And I'm just, I can't stop now. I got to keep going. And I'm seeing it go below empty. And I'm driving in the middle of the desert. I haven't seen any cars. It's nighttime. I'm on a freeway that is like a small, not interstate. No buildings, nothing.
Right.
And so the whole time I'm just saying to myself, I'm so thankful I made it to the gas station. I'm so thankful I made it to the gas station. I'm so thankful I made it to the gas station. While I'm watching the gas gauge go below empty, and I'm going, thank you so much that I got to the gas station. Thank you so much. And I'm just doing it over and over again until finally I pull into this gas station and I fill up the tank, and it filled to what is supposedly more than my tank can hold.
Oh wow.
It was a weird kind of experience.
So it's like, again, that piece of connecting with feelings and like manifestations, like connecting with a feeling of like what I'll be like once I'm there.
Yeah.
So even before you're there, and you're not so worried about how do you get there, just like feeling that and dropping into your body and feeling that sensation is I'm thankful, that relief.
Yes,
Thankful.
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. So what I've learned is that it's the emotions that we hold are the things that attract the experiences to us, and the emotions that we have inside will look for validation in our reality.
Our belief systems really shape what we attract and draw, how we interact with things, for sure.
Absolutely.
And if we shift that, things around us naturally shift without us have to physically do things.
Absolutely.
Do you mind if we go back to that moment of like, I love that story you were sharing about your whole trip from Atlanta to Colorado to Vancouver and then San Fran, and meeting your wife and then deciding like, okay, I'm gonna leave, I'm gone, this is what I'm used to, and then you're at the border and you were just like, you didn't know why you're crying. Like, did it take you a few days to figure that out, or did you sit there just crying at the border for a bit, and what was that moment like for you?
Yeah, well, so the funny thing was I was on my way to Seattle to spend a night with a friend of mine who had moved from Atlanta to Seattle. That was a friend of mine from Atlanta, and so when I was there, I talked to her about the fact that I was, felt like I had my heart ripped out, and I was like, oh, this is unusual but noteworthy. And then, my plan was to go to Burning Man, and then I was assuming that I would meet somebody there, and I ended up not meeting anybody there, and ended up my wife and saying, okay, well, this I need to continue in this direction, at least to see.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The piece that stood out to me as well is like, oh, I felt this, and you expressed it to her. It felt like my heart got ripped out. Right? What was that even like?
Oh, I don't know if I told her that.
Oh, you did?
At the time.
Okay.
Well, yeah. It was years later that we talked about some of the more interesting pieces of information that we got separately.
Tell her.
Well, we were in San Francisco at one point in time. Actually, it was that after I left Burning Man and was on my way to San Francisco, she came down and met me, and we had gone to Stinson Beach, and we were at this place where there was this bunker overlooking the ocean, and we were there, and we had a pretty cool experience. And she told me years later, that a voice told her that we would raise a daughter together. And she didn't tell me this then. And she hears this voice say, "You're going to raise a daughter together." She's like, "Well, that's funny because I'm never getting married again." And we don't live in the same country.
Right.
And so I'm never having kids.
Right.
So
never gonna happen.
Yeah, never going to happen. That's funny. And then a year later, I moved to Vancouver, and then we get married. And then 3 years later, she had actually been perimenopausal. So she hadn't gotten a period in like a year, I think. And a friend of hers, she was talking to a friend of hers, and a friend of hers like offered for her to take some kind of hormones or something. So she decides to take them, and then magically, there's a small window where our daughter was able to jump through. And so one day she finds out that she's expecting, lets me know, and then she tells me the story. She's like, "It's going to be a girl."
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay. So it sounds like throughout your whole process, your journey, and even working through just being fascinated through psychedelics, like this energy, and exploring more of that, and then meeting your teacher who's like, "Oh, no, you're really disconnected with your feelings," but then really learning to connect with your feelings allowed you to actually honor and actually feel what your body's telling you, which is true for yourself. It's like listening to that inner voice.
Yeah.
Higher consciousness.
Absolutely.
And I'm hearing a difference. I'm just trying to tie everything together. I'm hearing the difference like the first time when you split up with your first girlfriend that moved to Boston. You're just like, shut down.
Yeah.
And whereby with your wife, it's just like, I feel. Let's see where this goes. You didn't know what the plan was. You didn't.
No.
It's like, I know I'm feeling this. Let's explore this.
And there were quite a few in between.
Yeah. And so, of course, instead of shutting down, which could have been the easy default to go to again, right?
Right.
So what allowed you to really continue that journey of like dropping more into your feelings, and even in those difficult moments?
Yeah, it was actually, it's in the relationship with my wife that we would trigger each other in certain ways. And initially when we got into our relationship, we held space for the other person when they got triggered. So one person could be triggered and the other person could know that, well, this is what's going on, and then support the other person. So in this process, it made me feel safe enough to get angry. So prior to this relationship, I wouldn't be angry for very long periods of time because I felt like, well, spiritual people aren't supposed to be angry. And so I was really hung up on the law of attraction thing too, and was like, well, I don't want to hold any kind of emotional state that's not one that's going to bring me a positive experience. And so I shut those. Anytime I would have like a negative thing come up, I would shut it down. And then in our relationship, she would say, well, you can be angry. You can get angry, and it's not going to be any big deal. And I'm like, no, I didn't feel safe enough to do that for a while. And then over a period of time, I was able to get comfortable to share anger with her. And then at one point in time, that was too much for her. And so over the course of our relationship, we've been able to figure out how to use being triggered in order to heal some aspect that we were unaware of. But it took initially triggering each other, and then initially it was great, and then at one point in time it couldn't be sustained anymore because we had triggered each other in different ways. And so if I triggered her, I could hold space for her, but if we were both triggered at the same time, I couldn't go into my stuff because we would just be caught up on the semantics instead of being able to see what the truth of the situations were. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So
just too many reactive responses than just like being present, holding space for yourself. Because oftentimes when you're being triggered, it's learning to actually hold space for yourself. Because a lot of this inner voice, the negative self-talk or the blame or the guilt and shame, it can settle in.
Yeah.
And then add in how the other person's reacting reaffirms that with whatever narratives we have in our head, right?
That's right.
And so it's like learning to create space for yourself in that moment.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you're also creating space for the other person.
Yes.
But it's really hard when you're so both into it and there's no space for you. So how's there going to be space for the other person, right?
Yeah. So I had to, after that had happened for a bit, I had to figure out how to work on my own stuff separately. Like and then I figured out how to do it. Like, so if I get triggered, then I can go and be with whatever's underneath the trigger and integrate it into myself, and then we come back. So we don't do that. Like, we recognize that when we wake something up for the other person to see, then it's for the other person to go and deal with it. Yeah. I mean, we support each other in whatever ways we need to, or if, like, I always, as much as possible, I ask her how I can support her, and she does the same for me.
But it doesn't mean doing their work for them.
It doesn't. No, definitely, it's not doing the work for them.
Yeah.
No, the work is to show them that, oh, there's something on your face. Yeah. You can go get it off.
Right. Yeah. I love that analogy, and it's so wonderful you mentioned that, because like when I do couples counseling, I always tell, like, part of my job and role is to help support you, but it doesn't mean by taking sides or anything like that. It's like supporting you to build those authentic connections with yourself as individuals